I come from a family that they believe they are descendants of the old gods. That's the best way to say it. That they believe that they are carriers of a seed line that gives them the divine right to rule. And that is what gives them justification spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, scientifically to dominate the lesser species known as humans. Humans literally means a lesser species of man. And they do not believe they are a human in the same way. They believe they are something other than. And that's descendants of this hierarchical ruling species that is from the celestial realm that descended in the days of Jared and came down and procreated with the daughters of men, and that they still trace their seed line back to Gilgamesh, till Nimrod. And so this is what the dynastic families believe they have, is a superiority in their genetics on one side and the ability to commune with the divine. And so their children are progenitors of these, some might call them abreactions, mutations, these skills, psychic abilities, that kind of stuff, all variants of it. And so they raise up their children in this path with which involves a tremendous amount of shattering of the soul and the identity, so that there's compartmentalization within, and it allows them the ability to train their child up in a way that makes them conducive towards the family. I call them the family. That's what I called them. It's a better word for mafia than anything else. But no, we didn't call ourselves, like, my family wouldn't ever call themselves Illuminists. Yeah. Right? They're Luciferian. That's for certain. They worship Hallel and Shahar, as he's really known, but different reasons than what people are ascribed to,
What they believe, do you believe is true in the sense of them being able to trace back their lineage to the fallen?
Some of them, yes. I believe they absolutely can.
Do you think that's in your blood?
I believe it was, yeah. I lived a lot longer than I expected. Let me just put it that way. I did not think I would ever see 18. Never even comprehended the idea that I would ever know a family that wasn't this other thing, where the powers of control and access were given through the abuse of children. That's what I knew as normal. And I knew that people were corrupt and monsters and were willing to devour each other to rise to the top. I understood what wolves were when they ran the world. And so it was very hard for me to get to a place where I could believe that I could be redeemed, because I had witnessed enough of things in the families that make it seem like I am irredeemable forever. And it took me, there was one book that made a massive difference in that, which was called The Gospel to Every Creature. And I believe it's written by John Darnell. It is very hard to find. I have a copy, but it's been scrubbed, because no matter what, by blood or by belief, I believe that we have a Messiah that overcame and we can overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the words of our testimony, and not living our lives when faced with death. And it was that powerful encounter with the Almighty, with the true judge of all the earth, who I can make an appeal to, who can give me a new bloodline, and that's what he offers to everyone. Wow. And so I do believe that's available to those that come from these families. And where I was born, that is a place that's a high place, Mount Humphreys. It's a volcanic peaks that sit there. And the top of it is where the Hopi Indian and a lot of people had gathered forever to commune with the fallen. They believed that the sons of the sky would come down every season at the winter solstice, and they would abide from the winter solstice to the summer solstice there. And so this was a place where they would give their daughters over to them. This is Hopi mythology, like 101, and they would make these Kachina dolls, which were an effigy of the what I would say is a watcher angel, that would come, and the daughter would be given to him, and she would place that over her bed throughout her life, and that's her familiar spirit, right? That's where I was born into. And the people that still practice that old religion, that's the way I refer to it, they still do this. And they still take their children up there to give them over to them on these high days. And so I was born into that, and I was born through that seed line and into that ritual magic world. And but my mother's side are extreme Catholics and Jesuits through and through. And so her father ran a different operation in Southern California, which was much more based on the child exploitation side of the equation. And so all along that area down there is where I would be taken from my earliest days and shattered, abused, traumatized, systemically so. But it's for behavioral modifications purposes. That's the end goal of the abuse, is to shatter your willingness to resist and to break your will. And once they own you and you have been woefully convinced you can never get out, you give in. And that's what happened. I became the person who I was died, and the person they wanted me to become was what was born out of that disgusting phoenix ashes,
Wow.
right? And so you're living in this constant state of destabilization. And so it's as that destabilization happens and that patterning is built up, that's when a lot of the programming comes in to stabilize these new personalities and these new pursuits and endeavors. But I had this zealousness to see injustice stopped, and they preyed on that. And so they gave me opportunities to fight back against these perverts who are abusing children, and they would build up in me this rage, this need for vengeance, and then they would let me release that on somebody. And in the beginning, it was people I knew were bad guys I'd seen abuse children, and I would slice their throats up, man. I would tear them to freaking ribbons. And I loved it because I finally felt like I could stop something that I knew was evil. And I thought this was the way to stop all these monsters in the world. I just wanted to hunt monsters in the night. I just wanted to go down in the tunnels and hunt. And that's what they kind of created in me, this just freak of a need to hunt. And then they would bury that away, and you go back to normal life, and you go back to Christian school, and you go back to the regular life, and your parents act like it's just normal, but they're like, you got to have cover stories for why your child's all beat up and bruised and your face is smashed in. Like, I've had multiple reconstructive plastic surgeries from fights, like fighting for my stinking life. You got to have cover stories. So we would move around constantly. My parents would move us around sometimes every 6 months or not. But once you have a friend or a teacher or somebody who notices, starts asking questions, or you start bonding with somebody that's outside the cult, they're not going to tolerate that. And so we would move all the time. We moved into this place called Sholo Pinetop Lakeside, Arizona. And this is where an area, they would move to these specific high places where the veil is really thin. There's a very famous story about a guy who had an alien encounter out there, Snowflake, Arizona. And this is an area where I was right on the Apache reservation. White Mountain Apache Reservation was 100 yards from my door. And they would go out into the Apache reservation to these specific high places and do these rituals and this ritual magic. And a lot of that involved. That was when it was the worst to me, because I was old enough to understand how vile what was happening, in ritual magic. And at the same time, I was the most readily influenced by the family side of the equation. I thought the family and the military was the way out, but I hated this occult side of it because I saw men become monsters physically in front of my eyes. Other things come out of people's mouths. Other things come through their eyes. Like I witnessed enough transfiguration to know that this stuff is 100% stalking in the darkness. And I don't want that to rule me forever, but it was hard to not resist. You're in it.
All right. So you said you saw men become monsters. Is that metaphorically or literally?
It's literally. I've seen men do nasty things like an animal, but then I've seen men become not people.
Like literally
not
change.
Be the people. Yeah.
Okay.
And there is like lycanthropy, and there's these understandings of what the watchers are capable of doing that most people are just woefully ignorant of. And that's why they're perishing. It's because they lack a basic understanding of history. And one of the predominant understandings of what a watcher, specific class of celestial beings, is capable of is augmenting itself. They can shapeshift. That is by their nature. They're literally called metaschizmadzotoi in the Greek, in the New Testament. And it's because he says it's marvel not, because Hasatan you could say like transforms himself. That's a good word for it. But he shapeshifts himself into an angel of light. And his messengers, his apostles, disciples, they do the same thing. And he's like, this is because they are capable of becoming anything they want to be in order to deceive on one side of the equation. And that's what they'll do. And so when people start engaging in these necromantic rituals and other stuff, and they start to seek the embodiment of these celestial ones, they can get these things on them and in them, and they can't contain them. And some of these guys who are messing with this stuff, who don't come from the bloodline, are incapable of cohabitating like a parasite, and they feed off of each other, and they can't handle it. And so that's why families are recruited from these bloodlines, and children are recruited out, even if they don't know anything about it. Like you said, the vast majority of people who come from these bloodlines, there's a lot of muddying of the waters. There's a lot of purity that's been changed. There's a lot of half-breeds. There's a lot of quarter breeds, right? There's a lot of people that don't know this stuff, and they start to get into lesser magic, and all of a sudden it's like the doors of everybody open to them. But that's why. It's because they can host these things better. Whereas those that don't, they get taken over by this stuff, and they can't change back. They can't return, in a sense. Like, people become completely possessed and are incapable of expelling the darkness after that. And who do you turn to? You're like, you're going to go to the Catholic guy who's all into the same thing that you're into, you know? Like, most people don't understand what a real deliverance is required for somebody that has gone down this far down, where they are the consuming people. Like, that's a deep, devastating psychological, spiritual shock, physical, your liver, like the health. This is why I'm huge into health, because I've physically had to try to find ways to help people who have done all of these things. Like, the consumption of human blood does horrific things to the human body. You know, and this is a major practice within this. These families do drink blood. That's why we have these vampire class of people. It's not some kind of myth. People consume blood in order to live, extend their life force. Like, this is a normal thing. You've got billionaires today who admit it on Joe Rogan podcasts and other places where they're like, yeah, I used the blood of my son and all that. Like, you don't understand. This is a religion, you know, and this is a highly effective means of augmenting yourself. And so these watchers will give people this power. Their priest class will dispense that to people who want to go into, you know, like what I come from down there in the Apache reservation was the people that slip between realms and become animals, you know. And it's when a skinwalker kills, that's what you have to go through, man. I'm 9 years old and I had to stink and kill somebody with my hands, a friend, a person that I love, because my family was not somebody I loved. And so part of the in order to be inhabited by these spirits that will shapeshift you and allow you to become a different creature, you're going to kill somebody that you love, and you're going to kill them with your bare hands. You're going to breathe in their life as they die. And it's when you do that this stuff comes on you, and that's the stuff that makes you convinced you can never be redeemed. That being said, man, I do believe that there is a hierarchy, and you can call upon the Most High, man, and He has delivered us. I've seen Him provide supernatural miracles, because you got to understand, we're dealing with the fallen. We are not dealing with the Most High, and He owns a much more powerful arsenal. And let me tell you, at His word, all these nations, kingdoms, and thrones will bow. And it's an absolute reality. It's an inevitability. And so that's why I serve Him, man, because I've seen what the power of covenant is. And I had a covenant with the law of sin and death before in my life, but now I have a covenant with the Most High of peace and life. And He's given me a new purpose. He's given me a family. He's given me a mission. It's all a legal hierarchy in the spiritual realm. And this is why you got to understand the reason the scripture is written the way it is, as like from Genesis to Revelation, and He's got words in there that say do this and don't do this, is because if you do these things, you live by them. If you don't do these things, you die, you know? And He's like, part of the legal right that the adversary has in the spiritual realm is to execute justice against people that transgress the law, the instructions, the Torah, that sin. When they sin, the enemy has grounds to execute punishment against them. When they're walking in purity and holiness, they can't. This is Job chapter 1, fundamentals, where Yah's like sitting there in the throne room, calls Satan in, and it's like, tell me what's going on out there. Why don't you give me a report on everything? And he's like, I've been going down, up and down in the earth. We talked about this last time, up and down, walking down and going back and forth in it, you know? And he's like, have you considered my servant Job? He's blameless, right? Blameless means innocent. Like, he's an upright man. And he's like, the only reason he's like that is because you set a hedge of protection around him. No one can touch him. That hedge of protection is critical to understand spiritual warfare. That hedge of protection is governed by the King of Kings. That is an absolute reality. And if He says so, that thing comes down. If He says so, He can let something in. But at the same time, if we personally go in and start doing all the things He said don't do, and we start breaking down that hedge of protection personally by our choices, sinning, breaking, like, that's how that wall begins to get taken down. So the enemy has designed a system today to incentivize sinning, to make it better and more socially accepted and loved to embrace sin, to embrace lawlessness, to embrace rebellion, to embrace abnormality, to embrace perversion. By doing that, he's breaking down the hedges of protection that used to be in an area where there was biblical morality was more normalized. It was a lot harder for the enemy to get a lot of shots in on people's lives when they were in upright standing, when they were righteous men and women. But now we got a bunch of us who don't even realize what the scripture said because we don't read it for ourselves. We just go to church on Sunday and we're like, praise God. No idea what it says to do in there. No idea why our children are depressed and we have divorce at the same rates and pornography addictions at the same rates of the general populations. Like, we are a bunch of wounded warriors getting our lunch eaten by a much better adversary because we don't know what the rules of engagement are. We don't know how to stand in our authority and rebuke the enemy and take back the gates of darkness. Like, we are supposed to take the enemy's territory back. We're not supposed to sit idly by and just wait for that rapture. We're going to get out of here. It's going to be great. We don't got to just hang out until we get out of here. Like, no, we are made for war. There is nothing that competes with the power of the King of Kings, you know,
Yep.
like Yeshua, like I came to know him as, I say Yeshua now, and I say Yahuwah now. So there's specificity of terms, because Jesus was used in horrible ways in my life. I've seen people do things in the name of God that were evil. And I got to know him better by having a little more specific terms, because I had to deal with a lot of Satanists and a lot of witches and a lot of New Age practitioners of Kundalini garbage, Gnostic Jesus all over in Boulder and the places that we were living. And we had to learn quickly that there is an important distinction of terms between who the actual Son of God is versus the one that's being masqueraded to the masses as what he is, this all-embracing, lawless one. You know, there is a reason there's truth, absolute truths. And there's a reason there is a war against it. And there always has been. And there always will be, until the literal author of truth shows up and puts all things to rest and go ahead. And the last enemy that's defeated and thrown into that lake of fire is death. And that is a great, awesome, splendid moment. That hell, Sheol, that lake of everlasting, the lake of fire was created for the devil and his messengers, his angels, and death goes with them. The beast goes with them. And like, there's a very serious, actual, practical application of walking in that today, and why it's important to walk in his ways and to guard his commands. Like, by these words we live. All these other books that are on the table over here, they're interesting. They're fantastic. I love reading them. You know, this is The Gospel to Every Creature. What did Jesus mean, The Gospel to Every Creature, by John Darnell? This is an incredible book that preaches the gospel to a bunch of things and people that think they're not people anymore, and invaluable in my life. This one has an everlasting consequence about the mortality and the fruition of people's eternal souls. Critically important, their spirit, right? This one talks about ancient history, and I enjoy that stuff. And I love trying to decipher what the lost reality of our society is. But you know what? This one is living.
Yeah.
And that's distinct. That's set apart. That, like, the word we get, the churchianity word, is holy. Set apart, set apart, set apart is Yahuwah Elohim Almighty, who was and is to come. That's what the seraphim are flying around saying over his throne continually. He is other than us. He is entirely distinct from who we are and all the horrible, evil atrocities. That otherness, set apartness, is the power of righteousness. That's the power and the dominion and the glory and the majesty and the awesome splendor of him. But you know what? The fallen ones, they've embraced iniquity, which is sinning and transgressing the law, the Torah, and then continuing to walk that out in rebellion to produce transgression. From transgression, if you continue to sear that conscience and embrace that evil, that's iniquity. And that's its own force. That is the force. They're trying to propagandize and weaponize the force from Freemasonic and Kabbalistic Babylonian magicians. That iniquity force is lawlessness. That's the embracing of the lawless one, that you do what thou own will shall be the whole of the law. That's the satanic Bible filth. But they're trying to brand Jesus as that character to people. He sets you free from everything. You do whatever you want now, honey. You be you. The heart is good. It's like the heart is deceitful and desperately wicked. Who can know it? I'm like, this has a contradictory message to the vast majority of the changing tides of public opinion. This is an absolute statement. Those are unpopular these days. But you know what? They've never been popular. There's a broad way that leads to destruction, and there's a narrow path that leads to life, and few are they that find it. You know, but I try to challenge people and encourage them. Listen, read it for yourself from Genesis to Revelation before you render an opinion on what it says and whether or not you want to be somebody that's called after his name. Because there's consequences if you go and say, like, I do this in Jesus' name, and you're not doing anything related to him, bro. There's a lot of people that he's going to say, get away from me. I never knew you. Scary stuff. You know, like, I put these words on these blades to remind me that I'm not my own. You know, like, I'm in a covenant with my wife. So I had to surrender my knives to the King of Kings. I literally had to take blade, and give him over to him and say, that's yours. I am not my own anymore. I trust that if you ever need the warrior, you know where to find me. But until that day, I surrender my sovereignty to you. I took my finally well-earned sovereignty, self-sovereignty. I finally had freedom to be my own man. And I went and laid it at his feet because I understood fundamentally I was bought at a price. I was bought and ransomed out of bondage and slavery. And I was beaten and bloody and ruined. I was a ragged heap of a man by the time they got done with me. But you know what? He has rebuilt me, and he has taken me on a journey to trust him for my healing that's transformed my life. And he's giving me an inheritance that was pure and not filled with blood and betrayal. My children are my inheritance. Children are an inheritance. The fruit of the womb is my reward. Like arrows in the hand of a mighty man are the children of one's youth. Blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them. He will not be ashamed when he stands in the gates. He will not be turned back by his enemies. That principle, I don't have riches in carnal sense whatsoever. I've lived like a migrant worker for my wages. But you know what I have? My family. My children are sincerely them. My daughter is 8 years old today. My daughter's 8 years old. I wrote this book, a chapter in there called A Letter to My Daughter, because I thought I would die. I thought those would be the last words I ever said to her. I tried to write a book so that she could read it because Dad's dead. I thought I would be dead a long time ago. I did not think we'd make it this far. I wrote that book for her. I wrote that book for all the little girls that are out there that didn't have a dad that did the right thing and said no. I wrote this book and told my story to try to set those captives free. That there is freedom in confession. And he said in here, I got to confess my sins to one another to be healed. That's why I'm out here telling the things I don't want to talk about. But I've seen that when I do, I set others free. And sometimes the freedom's not for us, it's for them. Mm-hmm. And we set those captives free so that they don't have to live in the closets of cowardice anymore and compromise. We need a massive confession of sins in this country, a massive falling on our face of deep repentance and putting on sackcloth and ashes and mourning for the horrible evil we have done. Each of us individually and collectively, corporately. That's the only thing that'll save this country. It's not some political messiah. The Messiah already came, son, and he calls you to obedience and submission to him. And when you do, bro, he'll make your enemies be at peace with you. He says, when a man's ways are pleasing before him, he'll make even his enemies to be at peace with him. I have got to sit down in the presence of my enemies and break bread with them, and no, I did not kill them afterwards. I had the final fruit of the Spirit is self-control. And I've learned a strong thing about it. When my Father in heaven says, shh, I shut my mouth. When he says, put the blade away, son, put the blade away. And I've learned that he can deal with my enemies how he sees fit. And you know what? The pits that these monsters are digging for all of us corporately, all the horrible, evil agendas of what they're doing, the pits they're digging, they're going to fall in them. The snares that they set for our necks, they're going to fall into them and they will be caught up by them and consumed by them. You know what? But that comes through prayer and intercession and aligning our lives with what he said to do. And so on my blade, it says right on here, guard the commandments of Yahuwah your Elohim, to walk in his ways and revere him. Deuteronomy 8:6. If we do not have the fear of the Most High, we will fear every man, we will fear every emotion, we will fear the changing winds of public opinion and what other people think of us. But when we put to death our mortal enemy, which is fear, and we surrender to him and we realize, no, the world trembles at his rebuke.